So then following your appearance on CBC and then probably NBC or CBS, so what do you think of the difference of networks between Canadian networks and American networks?
Oh, gee, I don't think you can even compare the two. It's so totally different. The whole history is different. This, in Canada, our first network was created by government decree.
That's right.
And that's never happened in the United States. In fact, they're still nervous about Medicare.
Yeah. So you felt there was a bit of a different vibe when you went on
Oh,
CBC?
yeah, it's a very different, I found everything was different.
What was the feeling that you felt when you went on CBC as opposed to NBC in a Canadian network?
Oh, well, there wasn't much different. I'll certainly say this about the American system. They, from day one, cared about studio audiences enormously. I mean, all their first television studios were beautiful old theaters that were converted. They took these old theaters that are designed for audiences and they built a camera ramp up the middle, you know, at the front, and there were maybe 3 camera ramps built into an old theater, and you couldn't beat it. But here, I found it so frustrating. Their attitude to audiences, always at CBC, has been a problem. Even when we did Air Farce, we had a theater on Parliament Street, and as we went along, it was always packed when we did it. But we gradually noticed that seats were disappearing for the audience. The balcony first, that disappeared, that became an office. And then other sections of the audience were made into offices. It was just ridiculous. And eventually, there was so little space for the studio audience, and this is a theater. We just couldn't do it anymore. We were having trouble. The stage had electrical outlets all over it, and oh, it's just awful. So we said, that's it, we're out of here. And what Roger Abbott did at that time was, who was the boss, he started accepting, and we discussed it, we would accept all the invitations that we had from all over the country to come and do fundraising appearances for some group or other, and that's what we started doing. We flew to every single taping, whether it was Newfoundland or, you know, Corner Brook to Yellowknife to wherever. We just never stopped flying. Yeah. But the shows were wonderful because of that warmth of the audience and the response. My goodness, one day we were taping in Regina, and we had this sketch where the announcers of the news broadcasts were constantly being fired and replaced. And the people that replaced the announcer who had been fired, the next newscaster, his name was more complicated than the one before. So the guy introducing him always had trouble saying the name of the new announcer. And I had written one of the announcers' names as Rhomboid Muckfuster. and John Morgan had to introduce him. And of course he got the syllables confused.
And mixed up.
And actually ended up saying to this huge crowd, the F word.
Oh.
You know. And he went into shock. So, oh my, you know, he just went into shock. He was stunned, and the audience was in hysterics. And we all, I mean, we just had to quit the sketch. We were just sitting around laughing and laughing. And I said, I want to be the first out of here. I want the best seat in the squad car.
Royal Canadian Air Farce, it brought you to different places within Canada. What were some of your fondest memories, depending on the city that you were in?
I remember doing radio. John had written a sketch where a couple is sitting in a kind of an intimate discussion in a restaurant, and you could hear a train way in the distance, and you hear it getting closer, and they're still very intimate and everything. The train comes closer and closer, and finally comes right through the restaurant. The train goes through the restaurant, And the sound effects man said, John, you can't do this. It makes no sense. It won't work. It's stupid. You can't have a train coming through a restaurant. And he kept up this attitude, you know, and John was just standing there, and he said, finally he said, Alex, just please try it once, just once. If you don't like it, if the audience doesn't like it, or whoever's here doesn't like it. And finally, the guy agreed. The sound effects man agreed. It was a wonderful sound. But anyway, when we taped it, and this thing, and their chit-chat's so soft, and this train comes, and comes louder and louder and louder, and obviously the people at home realize it's coming in the restaurant. Well, the audience was in hysterics. I can't explain it. See, but that's a genius of comedy, because you have these ideas and they don't make sense, but they work. That's where he was so brilliant. I never understood where all that brilliance came from, because he started out, he was a school teacher, then he was in the Air Force, and then he was running a magazine. You know, he ended up being a magazine writer, and he ran one in Montreal. And then from that, he comes into doing comedy. And he was brilliant all the time, all the time. Somebody wanted a sketch about Canada not doing well in the America's Cup because we're not a yacht racing nation, you know. And so he wrote this sketch where there was a frigate, a Canadian frigate involved. And our yacht was not doing that well, but the frigate was off over the horizon. Nobody could see it. And you'd hear this boom. Another yacht would start sinking, you know, and then boom. So Canada's yacht was moving further and further into the front of the gang. It was very funny stuff. Anyway,